Good evening, everyone. I'm Jack Evans, Interim Dean of Kenan-Flagler Business School. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Weatherspoon Distinguished Faculty Scholar Lecture Series. This annual lecture has become one of the most anticipated events in the Kenan-Flagler calendar. It was created by a gift from Van and Kay Weatherspoon, seated here with us this evening. The objective was to provide lectures by outstanding visiting scholars and world leaders from the field of politics, education, business, and government. The purpose of this lecture series is to enrich the professional lives of the members of this community and to promote interesting discussion. And before I introduce this evening's distinguished speaker, I would like to announce that we've already selected next year's Weatherspoon lecturer. Noted journalist, author, and Washington Post columnist David Ignatius will join us in early 2015 at a date to be determined in the near future. But I would mention that by coincidence, I just finished reading one of his books and found it very interesting. So we can look forward to a very interesting evening. I want to acknowledge a few special guests who are here. First, University Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost Jim Dean and former Dean of Kenan-Flagler Business School. Former Chancellor Bill McCoy is with us here tonight. Bill Roper, Dean of the UNC School of Medicine and Vice Chancellor for Medical Affairs, and also CEO of the UNC Healthcare System. Susan King, Dean of our School of Journalism and Mass Communication. And former Deans of UNC Kenan-Flagler, Paul Fulton and Steve Jones, I think, are here. And finally, a special welcome for Doug Shackelford and his wife, Ann. On February 1st, Doug will begin his service as the next Dean of UNC Kenan-Flagler Business School. And I take special note of the fact that February 1st is 5 days from today, but who's counting? Tonight, we are honored to welcome former Governor of Florida, Jeb Bush, to UNC Kenan-Flagler Business School. He was elected the 43rd governor of the state of Florida on November 3rd, 1998, and was re-elected by a wide margin in 2002. His second term as governor ended in January 2007. He earned a bachelor's degree in Latin American Affairs from the University of Texas at Austin, after which he moved to Florida in 1981. With partner Armando Codina, he started a small real estate development company, which grew to become the largest full-service commercial real estate company in South Florida. He later served as Florida's Secretary of Commerce under Governor Bob Martinez. After his election as governor, Mr. Bush focused on reforming education. Also during his tenure, taxes were cut each year, and Florida led the nation in job growth. Governor Bush is currently the head of his own successful consulting firm, Jeb Bush and Associates. He also chairs the Foundation for Excellence in Education, and he's co-chair of the Barbara Bush Family Literacy Foundation, and also chair of the National Constitution Center. He's the son of former President George H.W. Bush and Barbara Bush. He lives in Miami with his wife, Columba, and they have 3 children. The topic of his speech tonight is America's Promise in Uncertain Times. Please join me in giving a special welcome to Governor Jeb Bush. Glad to have you with us.
Thanks. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Dean. All the other deans, Susan Dean, where is she? Susan, I got involved in politics just as an aside because I love my dad, who I consider to be the greatest man alive today, and back then I agreed with that. So the infection of all Bushes feeling compelled to run for office didn't hit me till later. This was really payback time for my dad, and Susan was on the trail with my dad in 1980. It's just a joy to, that was one of the great campaigns of all time. My dad lost, but he had a chance then to serve as vice president because of his running in 1980, and it was a blast. I campaigned in Iowa. I went to all 99 counties, if you can believe it, and the Muscatine pork roast was probably the most exciting event I got to do. Gained 20 pounds campaigning in Iowa. It is really a joy and an honor for me to be here to talk about, I was told I could talk for 40 minutes about things I'm passionate about, and I'm passionate about a lot of things, but I'm going to try to focus this a little bit on how we can regain our footing as a nation by creating an environment of sustained economic growth where more people have a chance to earn success. The problem in our country today, at least as I travel around, is a whole lot of people feel so disaffected they don't think that the capitalist system works for them. And it troubles me because it is the greatest system ever devised to create prosperity for more people than any other system, versions of the capitalist system. American capitalism has created more wealth and prosperity, more innovation, more improving the human condition than any social program, than any government program of any kind. And now at a time when we should be embracing it again to deal with the great challenges we face, it seems like a bunch of Americans have lost confidence because they don't think it works for them. It works for the wealthy, for sure, and if you're wealthy, it works quite well because you've got Ben Bernanke as your partner. It works for those that have already made it, for sure. It works for the well-educated. It works for those that have strong, intact families. But an increasing number of Americans don't feel it works for them, and we've lost confidence. And I'd like to talk about how we can regain confidence again in the greatest economic system that's been devised. But first, I want to give you some facts that kind of validates this belief that we may have lost our way. In 2010, 33% of all American families had a net worth of zero or negative, a third of American families. The average duration of employment in the United States is 3 times longer today than it was in 2000. The number of people on food stamps has grown from 17 million people in 2000 to 48 million today. The number of people receiving SSI disability payments is 10 times more than it was when my dad ran for president in 1980, even though the number of people with disabilities is actually in decline. The percentage of people who own homes is lower than it was in 1980, and the workforce participation rate is lower than it was in 1980 as well. And if you're born poor today in America, you're more likely to stay poor, and if you're born rich, you're more likely to stay wealthy than at any time in modern history of our country. Here's what I believe. If we don't change the current course we're on, the tepid economic growth, the new normal of, say, 1.5% of economic growth, will make it almost impossible for us to deal with the structural problems our country faces, and certainly won't allow us to seize the opportunities that exist in this incredible world that we're moving in if you have the skills to be able to pursue them. If we don't deal with our entitlement time bomb, our future isn't bright. However, if we build the right policies, the United States, of all the developed countries in the world, the United States perhaps is the only one, it's certainly the one of scale, that could grow as it once did and be an emerging nation again. And I think that's what we need to start thinking about, is that our country has the potential to be an emerging nation, not a country in decline, not a mature, developed country, but a country that is full of hope and aspiration for everybody, and that it acts as though it was an emerging nation, taking risks and taking advantage of the dynamism that should lead to a better result. In fact, if our country was to decide, if we, the 320 million of us, not that we decide in consensus anymore these days, but assume for a moment, let a girl dream here, assume for a moment that we all agreed that it would be better to grow at 3.5% per year instead of 1.5% per year, The incremental extra, because of compounding, the incremental economic activity in the 10th year would create $4.5 trillion of additional economic activity in the 10th year. That would be bigger than the current GDP of Germany. And if we taxed that at the current rate of local, state, and federal taxation, that's $1 trillion of recurring revenue each year, because we decided that maybe it's better to grow at 3.5% to 4% instead of 1.5% to 2%. That $1 trillion, by the way, of recurring money, there's no politician in America that can come up with an exotic form of taxation that comes close to that. So if you believe that the needs of the country need to be solved through government, and many people, I'm sure in this room, believe that that's appropriate. I too believe that there's a proper role for government. The best way to generate revenue for government isn't to try to expropriate people's money or to try to deal with the issue through the lens of income inequality. The best way to do it is to create the optimum means by which we grow, generating revenues that then can be transferred to take care of people as we would want. High economic growth would put our fiscal house in order over time without gutting national defense. The three things that are pressured when we have the situation we have today are national defense spending, infrastructure spending, research and development spending. The things that create long-term economic progress. Those are the things that are in decline today in America as entitlement programs and the transfer of wealth, the safety net programs, begin to grow and grow and grow. If I'm right, how do we get beyond where we are and renew our country through this new approach of sustained economic growth? I'm not here today as a partisan. If I was, I would say repeal Obamacare would be probably at the top of the list, and replacing it with a consumer-directed, market-oriented policy, where insurance was covering catastrophic coverage. And I would say that we need to reform the most counterproductive, complex tax code in the world today. By far, the United States has gone from being a place that had relatively simple taxation policies to obtuse, incredibly complex tax policies that make it hard for the next generation of achievers to be successful. I would suggest to you that our entitlement problems have to be fixed, and the longer we wait, the harder it is to maintain the social contract with our elderly. And most of us, as I look around, are almost qualified for that. And those that aren't are young enough to know that they're going to pay the price if we don't begin to deal with this. There won't be opportunities for the next generation unless we fix it. But tonight I want to talk about four other things that I think are less partisan, perhaps, less ideological. There's a little part of ideology perhaps in them, that if we embrace these, we could begin to see sustained economic growth. First is the need for immigration reform that would allow our country to be young and emerging again. Second is how do we radically transform our K-12 education so that more children gain the power of knowledge and the capacity to pursue a dream of earned success. Third is how do we embrace our own natural resources and American innovation to be able to become energy secure, creating thousands and thousands of high-wage jobs in our own country. Fourth is how do we put in practice economic freedom, and I would suggest to you it's the regulatory climate that we need to embrace economic freedom, which requires a complete changing of mindset. And then finally, why leadership actually matters in all of this. First, demography is destiny. As I mentioned, 10 years from now, or a version of this, 10 years from now, God willing, we'll all be 10 years older. And as a country, as we get older, the demographic pyramid is starting to get increasingly inverted. And the fertility rate of the country has dropped to below break even, family formation rates that are an all-time low, and it's not that hard to imagine where we'll be 10 years from now if we don't change the path that we're on. Now, while we're better off perhaps than some of the countries in the world, Japan already has a declining population. The Chinese, because of their ill-begotten one-child policy, has huge issues that they'll have to contend with. Europe, because they've not been able to embrace the immigrant experience in the same way that we have marginalized a lot of immigrants, creating social strife. The United States has within its means, because of our history, of our immigrant experience, to embrace immigration to be a catalytic converter for sustained economic growth. And it frustrates me to no end for people to use immigration as a wedge issue politically, both sides. Republicans view this from a political lens of saying if we don't secure the border, that somehow our national identity will be imperiled. And Democrats look at this, sadly, and correctly, I guess, as a wedge issue where they can win elections. The simple fact, though, is that a modernized immigration system would be a catalytic converter of sustained economic growth. In 1999, American-born scientists were granted 90,000 patents, compared to 70,000 patents from scientists from around the world. By 2009, 10 years later, there were more patents granted to foreign-born scientists in the United States than Americans. If you look at the business startup rate since 1993, there has been a decline among native-born Americans in starting up businesses. There has been a 50% increase in the startup businesses of immigrants that have come to this country to pursue their dreams with a vengeance. It seems to me that we ought to pause for a moment, put aside the politics, and say that we want more of that. My personal belief is that we should not fear people that come to this country, embrace our values, and want to pursue their dreams here. We should identify the people that aspire to a better life, because in the pursuit of that, they will create opportunities for all of us. So what do we need to do? It seems to me we need to control our border. Great countries have that as an obligation, and that includes not just at our border, but the 40% of the illegal immigrants that come to our country that come with legal visas and overstay their bounds. A country as sophisticated as the United States ought to be able to figure out how to politely find out where they are and politely ask them to leave. We ought to use local and state law enforcement to be able to to help the federal government in its enforcement of our immigration laws. We ought to have e-verify systems so that businesses know that they're hiring legal employees. All of those things there's broad consensus on how to go forward with that, and that ought to be the first step to lessen people's fears that there isn't the credibility to be able to maintain our immigration laws. Secondly, we need to move to an economically driven immigration system, not the one we have today. Most people don't realize this, but family reunification is 80% of all the legal immigrants that come to our country come because of this broad definition of family reunification, including adult siblings, adult parents, spouses, and minor children. We're the only country in the world that has that broad definition, and we have now, over the last 30 or 40 years, we have a chain migration effect, which crowds out the ability to bring in economically oriented immigrants, and it doesn't create the kind of sustained economic growth that we should have. My belief is we should narrow the family petitioning to where all the rest of the countries have, which is minor children and spouses, and expand dramatically the economic immigrants that exist that want to come to this country. We don't have to look too far other than north to our border, across our border to Canada. Canada has 13% of its immigrants coming for family purposes and over 80% coming for economic purposes, the exact opposite of what we have. And they have more economically driven immigrants than we do, even though they're 1/10 our size. There is a way to do this, and it should be something that does not have there shouldn't be a big political fight about this, although this does impact vote getting going forward, and it's relatively controversial. It seems to me that if we did that, we would create the possibility of 500,000 economically driven immigrants coming to our country. Do you honestly think that Detroit couldn't rebound quicker if we unleashed the aspirations of people that wanted to come to this country, work hard, play by the rules, create wealth and prosperity for their families, and then all of those associated with that business? Of course it would. That is the American experience, and it seems to me we should open the doors to anybody that graduates with a STEM degree in a master's or PhD program from this university or any other. We ought to dramatically expand the H-1B visa program and make it possible for them to gain residency. H-1B visa holders have a contract normally for 3 to 5 years in these high technology companies, but the waiting list in order to become a resident is 10 years. We train people, they come to our schools, then we kick them out of our country and they immediately become competitors in other countries. It makes no sense. If we focused on this and a guest worker program that was based on economic need, we would, I think, jumpstart economic growth in this country in a very dramatic and sustained way. But in order to deal with this, we also have to deal with the 11 to 12 million people that are here illegally. And there needs to be a path to legal status to make this happen by paying a fine, learning English, not receiving any government benefits, having a job. It is not the American way to make people live in the shadows in perpetuity. It's not the America I know, and I'm sure it's not the one whose values that you believe in. And finally, I would argue that we need civics education in this country. We need to revitalize the notion of what it is to be an American. Sadly, I'm not sure that there's a set of values that we would all agree on anymore about what being an American is. The beauty of our country's immigrant experience is that people embrace those values. It's not based on racial identity or ethnic identity, it's based on a set of values. And Americans themselves I think, have sensed that those values aren't as shared as they once were. In order to restore those values, I think learning about them, learning our history, having a much more intense effort for people through civics education to understand our heritage and why it's important for our future, both for native-born Americans and certainly for immigrants. Right now, to become a legal immigrant in our country, you have to pass a test of 10 questions, and you have to get 6 of them right. The questions aren't that hard. I've actually, the lady that cuts my hair became an American citizen a couple of years ago, and I was helping her every time I got a haircut. She just basically memorized every one of the questions because she really wanted to be in this country. She loved this country, and it was a place of great opportunity for her. Sadly, if you look at polls, when American-born folks are given that same test, they do worse. It's important for us to realize that in order to make this work, there has to be a set of shared values. The second suggestion I have is, in order to create sustained economic growth, we have to move away from the gaps that exist because only a quarter of our kids are college or career ready. Now, I know here in North Carolina you've had cutbacks in K-12 spending, but United States spending on education is higher than every country in the world, K-12 spending, than Luxembourg. I made the mistake in one speech saying, not including Luxembourg. The PolitiFact folks, I don't know if you follow the PolitiFact deal. You probably have it. The Charlotte Observer, I think, covers this. And they gave me like a, I don't know if my hair was on fire, but, you know, liar, liar kind of thing. Luxembourg, for crying out loud, it's like 1/10 of Miami-Dade County. Okay, I apologize. I didn't include Luxembourg, but spending is not the problem here. The problem is that only a quarter of our kids pass the ACT, all elements of the ACT test, which is the measurement of whether someone is college ready. Half of the entering community college students in the United States require remediation. About a third of high school graduates fail the military entrance exam. Our student performance on all the international benchmark tests, I'll be polite, is mediocre at best. Here in the United States, we worry a lot about our children's self-esteem. In Asia, they worry about whether their kids have a deep understanding of algebra and science. So you tell me which generation of students is going to be the students in their ascendancy with that kind of attitude. Now look, there's no magic formula. In fact, what we've learned through trial and error in Florida, and since then as the foundation that I lead, is that it really requires a suite of reforms, of comprehensive reform to be able to move this system forward. I would suggest to you that it starts with early literacy. I don't understand the logic that exists in every state but a handful, maybe 4 states right now, that have an I'm not kidding gate between 3rd and 4th grade. I don't understand the logic of passing a child on that's functionally illiterate in 3rd grade to 4th grade. Because if you remember your children's education, 4th grade is when they have to read to learn. Up till then, they're reading how to learn. But yet we have about a third of our kids that are functionally illiterate. We pass them along worried about their self-esteem rather than whether they can read, and the learning gaps grow and grow and grow. I think there's a better approach, which is to focus on early literacy and have a gate that is serious and move the system towards assuring that every child is a functional reader by 4th grade. The gaps will narrow. In the state of Florida, 32% of all kids were functionally illiterate, and we eliminated social promotion in 3rd grade, and we cut that illiteracy rate in half in 1 year's time. And now it's declined even more. And my guess is if other states did that, we would begin to reinvest in the things that would allow them to have higher learning skills rather than to try to remediate in high school and then remediate again in our universities and our community colleges. So literacy starting out is hugely important. Every indicator, if you look at where a child in the juvenile justice system is or an adult in the prison system, there's a direct, almost one-to-one link on their ability to read. It locks doors of opportunity for people, and the frustration then creates huge demands on government. This should be a place where Democrats and Republicans should agree, and I hope that they do. The second suggestion I have is that we need to stop all the political correctness and recognize that our standards are too diluted, there are too many of them, they're too politically correct, and they're not benchmarked to the best in the world. High, lofty expectations matter. High standards matter. Children are smarter than we give them credit for. We think that somehow life experience, the life circumstances of children make it impossible for some to learn and others will learn automatically. But if we dumb down the standards and our curriculum is politically correct, we end up with what we have, which is a Tower of Babel, which is hard to be able to measure where students are. But I told you, if you measure this success by achieving at the end of 12th grade a simple gate of having a child be college ready or career ready, at most, a third of our kids are doing just that. So high, lofty expectations are part of this. There's a huge debate right now going on about this. On the left, teachers' unions don't like the standards because they'll be assessed. And if they're assessed, they'll show these results, and when those results are shown, that will make them look bad, and it will be harder for them to sustain this collective bargaining process rather than moving to a professional kind of system of compensation for teachers. On the right, there's no confidence that these standards won't be taken over by President Obama, I guess. So Obamacare is a pejorative, trust me, amongst many people on the right. And so now we're seeing this pushback, and the end result would be what we have now. And for those that are opposed to Common Core state standards, I would urge them to defend what we have, because what we have isn't cutting it. The university system here and the community college system here in North Carolina spends hundreds of millions of dollars trying to remediate what should have been taught in high school and middle school. High, lofty expectations are part of this. The third suggestion on education reform is that we have a system that if a Martian McKinsey guy came down and was asked to study the system, he'd wonder, why is it that this great dynamic country has 13,174 government-run, highly politicized, highly unionized monopolies as the governance model for K-12 education? That's what we have, 13,174 school districts that are focused on the economic interests of the adults. Now, many of these people in the system, don't get me wrong, care about whether students are learning. But the system itself, the governance model, may have worked in 1910 or 1914. It doesn't work to the extent that it could today. And school choice is the path out of this. We should empower as many choices as possible for parents because that engages them, that makes them more part of the learning experience. It creates competition. This school, I'm sure, the students will appreciate this. Competition is actually a good thing. It brings out better results. And if you have no competition, the complacency allows the miserable results that we have. And so I'm a strong believer in public and private school choice. In Louisiana, for example, there's course choice, where you can pick a course that's approved by the state, that can be developed by the best and the brightest, not just in Louisiana, but in other places, so that young people can enhance their learning. And there's much more customized learning in that regard. My fourth suggestion is accountability truly matters. Now, I know this is going to be a radical idea, but in Florida, we grade schools A, B, C, D, and F 100% based on student learning. And we started this, we had a lot more D's and F schools, and because we basically created a more transparent system, we ended up seeing dramatic gains. And the combination of school choice, robust accountability, a focus on early childhood literacy, and higher expectations through higher standards moved Florida from literally the back of the pack. We spend less per student than the national average, just to remind everybody. We were 50th in the graduation rate. We were 29th out of 31 on the NAEP test, the nation's report card. And in 10 years' time, through a lot of hard work and a lot of opposition, and a lot of fights, we got to the point we were 6th out of 50 on the NAEP test for 4th grade reading. Florida's Hispanic kids on the last NAEP test on 4th and 8th grade reading do better than the average of 38 states. Florida's low-income Hispanic kids do better than the California average. Florida's Hispanic kids are number 1 in the country. Florida's learning disabled kids are number 1 in the country. Florida's African-American kids are number 3 in the country. Florida's low-income kids are in the top 3 in the country. Because we count every kid, every child matters in our accountability system. You can't just cast aside and excuse away why some kids are learning and some kids can't. We've seen a dramatic improvement in learning, and our graduation rate has improved every year over the last 14 years. By moving the needle in a comprehensive way, if the nation did that, we would begin to deal with these learning gaps pretty quickly, and we could reinvest the money that now goes to remediate and to deal with the demands on government when children don't get the power of knowledge to bigger and broader things that would allow us to have sustained economic growth. My next suggestion is that we have, because of American innovation, because of an immigrant, actually, George Mitchell, a Greek immigrant, who took 2 existing technologies, and the innovation was to apply them together, created perhaps the greatest revolution since the commercialization of the internet. It's called hydraulic fracking. And it now creates the possibility of the United States, with North American resources, Mexico, Canada, and the United States, to be energy secure within 5 years. 2 years ago, the balance of payments on energy for the United States was $300 billion outflow. $300 billion of money that goes to places, in many cases, to countries that either hate us now or are unstable and could learn to hate us in a heartbeat with regime change. $300 billion that does not create any jobs or any economic activity. This is the greatest potential for us to be able to create high-wage jobs over the long haul. And that is to not create barriers to allow this to happen, but to embrace it. And if we did that, think of what the benefits are. We have the chance of reindustrializing our country, which has been shooken to the core, basically, because of globalization. North Carolina has seen tremendous transitions away from manufacturing because of this. Natural gas at a low price allows us to be more competitive. It allows us to save consumers. It's the best deal that has happened over the last 5 or 6 years for the American consumer. It's about the only good deal American consumer has gotten. All other energy prices have gone up, but natural gas, if your home is powered by natural gas, you've seen hundreds of billions of dollars of decline. It allows us to create opportunities in terms of the servicing of this industry, because this is high investment with a lot of services, a lot of investment into the ground. If you're a truck driver today and you're working in the Balkan in North Carolina, in North Dakota, you can make $100,000 a year with 6 months of training. Those kind of jobs create real opportunities for lots of people. And it seems to me that we should embrace this rather than try to create barriers for its entry. So what should we do? Well, the first thing I would suggest is that we ought to approve the XL pipeline, for crying out loud. It's taken longer to give a permit for something that shouldn't have to have had a permit. The economic relations between Canada and the United States is fully integrated economies. The idea that the State Department has no expertise on this subject matter would have to approve a permit, it just seems ludicrous to me, and it's an insult to our second largest trading partner. And if we don't approve the pipeline, then the Canadians are going to build pipelines to the east and west, where the users of this will have a much higher carbon footprint. The industries in Asia, particularly China, will have a much higher carbon footprint than if the oil comes south and it arrives in the Gulf Coast refineries. It's taken longer to give this permit to show you the difference of America today than America of yesteryear than it took to build the Pentagon. 6 million square feet under roof in a swamp in 1941 was built in 16 months. Today, we're still waiting. I think we're in year 4 of the approval of this pipeline. We should have rational regulation of fracking to make sure that water quality and other elements of this are managed in a thoughtful way, not to kill it, but to regulate it responsibly to sustain it. We should open up more federal lands and waters. There's been a dramatic decline under this administration in order to enhance and increase the chance of energy security. We should help Mexico with the modernization of its oil sector. Our objective should be energy security within the next 5 years, and it is doable. There should be incentives for natural gas use for transportation. 3 million barrels per day equivalent of diesel is used to move goods throughout the United States. 3 million barrels per day. If we cut that in half by using compressed natural gas or liquefied natural gas, we would lower our balance of payments problems and lower the costs of transportation to make the country significantly more competitive. I think we ought to figure out ways to build out the natural gas infrastructure in the Northeast, where about 1 million barrels per day of fuel oil goes into the Northeast, particularly this time of year, subsidized by the federal government. The best subsidy would be a lower price of natural gas, cleaner, that would go to this community, but there's big resistance in the Northeast. It seems with leadership we could make that happen. There should be incentives for conservation in our homes, in our cars, in our businesses. We should continue to find ways, creative ways, to deal with conservation because it is the best investment, if you will, the lowest cost investment yielding significant results. And finally, I would suggest to you that market forces ought to be able to decide disruption rather than the government. I mean, the last thing that we need to do is to continue on this path of having a venture capital arm inside of any agency of government, particularly the Department of Energy. It has been a complete disaster because market forces made it so. These were all well-intended ideas. Solyndra and, the President Obama a year ago was at the University of Miami bragging about algae development. I mean, that's great. That's fine. Except it's not going to work because it costs 10 times to 20 times more than a unit of energy produced by the free markets. If we focused on this and created a strategy, my guess is we could increase real growth over the next decade by more than 1%, or at least 1% per year, creating the kind of a possibility of having a much more emerging kind of nation approach to the challenges that we face. Finally, I would suggest to you that as governor, one of the things I learned was whenever there was a tragedy, and there always, in Florida trust me, we had a lot of them. We had a lot of weird things happen, a lot of sad things happen. Every day there was something unusual. And a lot of times, I know, whenever there's a tragedy, a baby is drowned in a pool, or a baby loses their life in a crib in a motel. Those are two examples I can think of. Literally scores of these things come each and every year. The cry is to do something. The cry is to say, on the 0.1% of human activity in that particular field of endeavor, we need to do something. And over time, we've done something. We've added collectively, locally, state, and federally, a mass of regulations on top of human behavior that has redefined who we are. I don't know if you saw the Heritage Foundation report that put the United States for the first time since they've done these studies out of the top 10 in terms of our competitive posture. We're now 12. We've had 6 straight years of decline. And other countries have figured this out, that the reason why they're improving and we're pulling back is the opaque nature of our rules, the lack of transparency, the complication, the uncertainty is stifling the ability for the next generation to be successful. Now, if you're working for a large company in the Research Triangle, and you've got a huge staff of compliance officers, of lawyers and lobbyists and accountants, you can take that cost and spread it out over a big enterprise and everything's okay. But the next generation of big companies start in a garage. And the compliance costs and the uncertainty that we've now created at the local, state, and federal level is mind-boggling. Hundreds of thousands of pages of rules with Dodd-Frank and the Affordable Care Act. And it's still work in progress. The Volcker rule, for example, was a rule that made a lot of sense to me, which is, it simply stated if a bank was going to use its own capital, it couldn't use its own capital to make proprietary investing. It'd only serve its clients. And that prohibition was a pretty useful idea. The problem is that it took 4 years for the rule to actually finally make its way to completion. And the rulemaking, the simple sentence in the law that I just described to you is 800 pages in the rules. And the rules themselves now are going to be enforced by a whole myriad of agencies, and no one truly knows whether or not they're in compliance with this rule. Now, if you add up all the things that take place like this is probably the single biggest reason why we've lost the animal spirits in our country and why we'll never be emerging again if we accept this get-in-line mentality that we have to do something every time there's a tragedy. My belief is that we need to have a conversation as a nation. Are we willing to accept some consequence for the fact that we're all imperfect under God's watchful eye? Do we honestly think that we can outsource our own personal responsibility as citizens, as people in our own community, and expect the government to fill that void effectively? I think there's enough evidence to suggest that that's not the case, that that would be a false promise or a false sense that it would work. I'll let you all play this scenario out in your minds going forward. One of the most exciting innovations that's taking place right now is our driverless cars. I don't know if anybody's driven in one of the driverless cars. It's like, first of all, you almost have a heart attack when you're thinking, this guy, I'm in this car and I'm on the interstate and I'm not driving it. Well, anyway, once you get past that and you start thinking about the possibilities of increased productivity, the amazing saving of money, the ability to have cars that have significantly less weight and less carbon footprint if you're concerned about climate change, for example, and the ability for families maybe only have one car, because 60 to 70% of all driving is within a small radius of where you live. The ability to enhance your life, to improve the quality of life, to improve productivity, it is mind-boggling to think of the possibilities of this. And it's not some Star Wars out into the future thing. Many companies are working on developing the technology, and the technology is here. This could be rolled out in relatively short order. But the question I have for you tonight is, do you think it's possible with this do-something mentality that we outsource kind of every act of human endeavor to government to try to create the rules of engagement without our involvement? Do you think it's possible that something as disruptive and as exciting as driverless cars will actually happen in a country like ours? First of all, you'll have all the incumbents, the Geicos, the car manufacturers. Think of all the people that are going to lose something and they'll have to change. They're going to they'll use their powers to keep the barriers of entry high. And then you'll have all the regulators. Think of how many regulators would get their paws on this with great joy. You got the Department of Transportation. You have the state and local governments. You may have local governments saying you can't drive unless we add additional regulations on top of what maybe the federal government does. And all these barriers of entry are probably the biggest threat to what will be one of the most exciting innovations in modern times. And you can add 10 to 15 to 20 of the innovations that are being developed in someone's garage right now that are just as possible in terms of the excitement and the wealth creation and the benefits to society. It's not just one. It's literally hundreds of these incredible ideas in the world we're in, but we're not prepared for them because we have not figured out that economic freedom needs to be protected each and every time that there's a choice. Each and every time we're confronted at the local level or at the state level or at the federal level to say, should we allow for some uncertainty to create more prosperity and a more dynamic response to society, or should we try to regulate everything to the point where it stifles even the beginning of the journey? It seems to me that this is an important part of the conversation that is completely missing today in the political sphere, and I hope that you recognize its potential and hope that you encourage others to have this conversation starting at the local level, but clearly this is a problem in Washington, D.C. as well. The final thing I'll say is that I hope you agree, like I do, that nothing happens by osmosis. No big things happen by luck. Things happen because people will them by their own acts. Big things happen because of leadership. This school is based on the foundation of leadership. The institute that you have here is nationally known and nationally renowned, and it's smart for a business school to be focused on leadership. Every school should be focused on this because there is a dearth of leadership right now in our country. But it hasn't always been that way, has it? I mean, the idea that somehow, oh, the system's too complicated, oh, you know, it's just there's too much gridlock and nothing can happen, oh, I'm just a leaf in the river of history and I have no, it's luck. It's luck whether you're successful as president. It's luck whether you're successful as governor or in business. It has nothing to do with your own actions. That's kind of the growing mentality that exists, and I would argue that that's not the case. There's enough examples of history where the exact opposite happened. John Kennedy called for a man to land on the moon within a certain period of time. And it created a generation of investment in research and development and innovation that sparked all sorts of things beyond just an astronaut making it to the moon. He led. Lyndon Johnson, after the assassination of John Kennedy, in 6 weeks' time, passed the Kennedy tax cuts. I always thought that President Kennedy did it because they were called the Kennedy tax cuts. That was Lyndon Johnson that did that. And it took hands-on leadership for it to happen, and it set the stage for the most historic civil rights legislation in American history. And he did this because he was all in. Here's a guy who's, most historians would suggest was flawed in many ways, but he had the humility to keep the Kennedy team in place. They called him cornpone to his back. You're all here in this great university in the South, and I went to the University of Texas, almost as good maybe, I don't know. But in any case, I tire from the people, the folks up north that think that they have some, franchise on people that can think and people that are smart. It always bothered me. I went to school in Andover where I got this crap all the time. So I kind of defend Johnson because he was a Texan and that they looked down on him for that. But imagine the humility of it being treated like that and basically put in the basement of the White House to then ask everyone with humility to stay because he knew it was important to build this agenda. He cajoled, he begged, he threatened, he was all in. The kind of leadership that we lack today, Lyndon Johnson showed, and it made a huge difference in the future of our country. Or how about Ronald Reagan, who did something consistently as president that I found remarkable, which was he didn't do victory dances on his opponents. He embraced them. He did it with a good-naturedness that was really contagious and made it hard to dislike the guy and also made it possible that the next big thing could actually be discussed. He and Tip O'Neill didn't agree on anything politically, but yet through that personal relationship that is an element of leadership that seems to be lacking today, there was a trust that was built up that saved Social Security for a generation of time. And many other things happened because Ronald Reagan led. Or how about my dad at the end of the fall of the Berlin Wall falling down? Susan was one of those, I don't know if you were around then, but a lot of the people were critical of my dad for not going to Berlin to actually literally do a victory dance on top of the wall with the young Berliners to participate in this because the United States' role was such a significant one. And my dad knew that while he was criticized for not doing this, my dad knew that had he done it, it would have put Gorbachev in a position that would have been impossible, that he would have lost control and the transition could have been a lot more bloody than it turned out to be. Having the humility and the skills necessary to know how to manage a process is part of leadership as well. And we need that kind of leadership today in order to reweave the consensus nature of this country. The United States historically has been a country that has found consensus. We're a diverse group. We have lots of different views. It's time for people in public and private life to begin to reweave this sense that building consensus is not a loss of your manhood, that compromising in order to achieve a broader objective is a good thing, not a bad thing. If we do that, my guess is that our country could grow at 3 or 4 or 5% per year over the long haul, that we could make sure that the entitlement system, the social contract that is important for our country stays intact, that people don't feel disaffected, that they are willing to embrace the unknown with a more dynamic way of life rather than saying that economic security through government dependency is the better way to go. If we do those things, we can renew our country and make it the beacon of freedom for the rest of the world. I hope that is something that you all share in my belief, whether you agree with every one of my views on how to get there. I hope that as a country we begin to think that that's the proper path to go. Thank you for allowing me to come. Thanks. I think I spoke too long. I apologize. But we have time for Q&A, don't we? I got a little wound up. Stop looking at my watch. That was a mistake. Any questions, comments? Yes.
You talked about innovation. I think part of the building of this great country was around innovation. What can we do as a country to get back to that, to empower instead of inhibit.
Well, I think the last part of just embrace economic freedom, where to me the biggest barrier for, the biggest threat to innovation isn't that we, extend the tax credit. All that, extending the R&D tax credit, making it permanent would be a good idea. I don't want to downgrade that idea. But the bigger challenge is the rules on top of behavior have gotten so onerous that it's hard to imagine innovative solutions just cascading into our lives because there's so many barriers now. Philip Howard is a friend of mine. I don't know if you've read any of his work. He's probably the leading advocate for common sense in regulation. And the book he wrote, the first book is Death of Common Sense, and he's written 3 or 4 more. He's got a book that he just sent me that will be published later this month or next month. And he talks about the Bayonne Bridge. There are a few guys and gals from New York. The Bayonne Bridge is the bridge under which the ships have to go to the Newark port. And so the whole world is rearranging itself in anticipation of the Panamex, the huge expansion of the Panama Canal to allow for these much larger ships to go through. And New York is the largest port in Newark is the largest port on the East Coast, and they too thought it would be a good idea to actually prepare for the 2015, it may be 2016, now they've got some issues in Panama, but 2015, 2016, these big, huge tankers are coming, freighters, and the Bayonne Bridge is never, I don't think it'll ever get rebuilt. The complexity of the Coast Guard versus the EPA versus local governments versus a historical review to make sure that the bridge has no impact, even though the bridge is going over water, for crying out loud. And the lobbyists trying to stop it, the lobbyists trying to support it. And the President of the United States says that this is a project of national priority. And yet, I mean, his own department laughs at him, effectively, by continuing to ask questions that delays all this. And all the environmental impact studies, we've created so much complexity that it's difficult to imagine, unless we change, that we're going to be an innovative nation. Unless it's done, like Peter Thiel wants to do it. I think that's how he pronounces his last name. He's building he has a ship that if you get past 15 miles, I guess you're in non-US waters. He wants to build a utopia for entrepreneurs with no rules on this ship. His solution may be we have a bunch of cruise ships, that house all the next generation of Bill Gates just off our shore so that all these stupid rules don't comply. Yeah.
What influence does your mama have on your future plans?
For the record, because I know there are a couple of press members here, I love my mother. And I'd never want to get crosswise with her because that's just a losing proposition. She's something else. I'll tell you the story. I found out her views about my possible run for getting back in politics when I was with family members for the opening of George W.'s presidential library. So there was about 20 of us at the hotel, and Mom's on the Today Show with Laura and Jenna and Barbara. And the last question comes, and it's about me, and she goes, "I don't think he should run. Too many Clintons and whatever, too many Bushes have run," or so. I forgot what she said, and I'm thinking, really? I mean, could you have told me beforehand? It's like, then when I see her at the event, I go, "Mom, what'd you do?" "I didn't do anything." She totally denied it, forgetting that there were millions of people watching the Today Show. I just, what do you do? So then she promised me she's not going to talk about it again. Yeah. So she does this interview on C-SPAN, and it's the only interesting part I told her at least, must have been the only interesting part of the interview because they're touting this like nobody's business. As trying to get people to watch C-SPAN, which is not an easy thing to do, I guess. It was a First Lady's show, and she denied that. She said, "No, I didn't say anything." And it had already come out, leaked that she had said the same thing. And then she called me back, "Yes, I did say that, but that was 4 months ago, and I promised you after." So She's doing great. She, oh my God. It'd be Clarity. She was in charge of regulation in our family, I promise you that. The nickname that was given to her by many people was the Silver Fox, because she got her hair early. I think she turned gray when she was maybe 38 or 40 or something like that, and so we called her the Silver Fox. But the real nickname is the Enforcer. So it would work pretty well. Yes. Yes.
So let's say that you didn't vote for the president, but you were interviewing for the next, you weren't running, but you were interviewing candidates for the next president of the United States. Could you tell us the 3 key experiences and the 3 key characteristics you would look for in that person?
Wow. I would say joy, that the job should be joyful, that you should spread. We need to change the pessimism that exists. And president is part king, part prime minister, right? You know, it's a complex job. It's not all about 5-point plans and running cabinet meetings. It's also making a mark on the psyche of the people that you serve. And so I do think the next president needs to be hopeful, optimistic, and incredibly joyful, to the point where he's even criticized for being naively optimistic. I yearn for those days again. I think it's okay to be optimistic, because I actually, you know, the last 6 years, I've been hanging out with some incredible people, and the stuff that's going on in this world is just phenomenal. But yet we're moping around thinking that the future is going to be less possible than the past, and I just find that that's not the right kind of leadership we need today. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is to get a sense, if I was going to ask to do an interview, I would probe to determine whether someone viewed their success measured by accomplishments or by making a point. Does that make sense? In other words, there are some really effective spokespeople on the left and right today in America, incredibly gifted orators, but not much is going on. I mean, okay, fine, you gave a great speech. Now what? You know, I mean, there's still people hurting. There's still people anxious. We have significant challenges in our country, and the problems have to be solved one by one. And so, how you measure your success, I'd say, would be a second question. I'm kind of winging here as I go along. I mean, the third part of this that I didn't bring up, but it's really the place where presidents have to lead, is on foreign policy, because that's disproportionately their responsibility. The other things require consensus with Congress, building consensus with the American people. Foreign policy, you have to lead, and getting a sense of what the principles of the next president would be, I think, should be what the campaign's about. It hasn't necessarily in the last few years because of our economic challenges, but I do think we need to probe. There should be a set of guiding principles for foreign policy. It's not to say that you're rigid, because conditions change, but it works a lot better when people around the world know what the United States stands for. The uncertainty creates instability, and the instability creates, you know, the need to engage in ways that may not be the right way. So those would be three. What about you? If you were going to ask the question. No, I'm curious. I gave you my best shot. That's an interesting question, really.
Well, I agree with you, one on foreign policy. I think that's absolutely key. I think it's been missing significantly.
Yeah.
I also agree with you on being able to build consensus. I didn't think about the joy thing, but for me it was a very positive attitude about the future of this country.
Yeah, well, let's...
And, you know, a little bit of what Johnson had. I mean, you know, he got that bill done because he gave it everything he had. He called it every chit, he worked with consensus, he drove the organization, and he was humble. And I think humility is a huge part of it, too, because I want you to lead with talent, and you're not the only talent. So, good answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the question.
Gentleman over here.
Yes, sir.
You talked about STEM graduates and need STEM education. We have found recently, you know, our high school students are not being prepared to study STEM curriculum. So
No.
that's not true?
No, I agree with you. No, they're not.
We're watching an economy that's growing in the United States that demands more STEM jobs, and our universities aren't putting out engineers and scientists at the rate we need. We're finding shortages. How do we generate the interest differences where we're watching 25% of our graduates at baccalaureate levels coming out with STEM degrees, and our competition's close to twice that, 35-40% rate in Germany. How do we?
Well, one short-term answer is immigration reform, for starters. I mean, that during the Great Recession, two things have happened during this downturn. One, median income has actually declined by 7% since the recovery started. The first recovery in American modern history where you've seen declining income. And it's because, there are many reasons, but a principal reason is that we have had, throughout this devastating time of high unemployment, people giving up, workforce participation at an all-time low, or low since 1979. We've had 3 million skilled jobs unfilled during the whole time. And so it's, to your point, a lot of these are, not all of them are in the high-end, high-income STEM fields, but they're technical jobs. They're jobs that require a better, more relevant education, either through community colleges, through online learning, through retraining, or through our university systems. And so we're not cutting it right now, and a lot of it, I think, relates to the lack of interest. I mean, it's not like, people can volunteer to get a STEM-related degree, and it's in their economic interest to do so, but as you said, the numbers are pretty dismal. So, more teaching, hiring more teachers that are in field, in high school, for example, is one of the strategies that I think has to be done. A lot of science and math is taught by PE coaches, or I'm not disparaging PE coaches. That was my favorite subject when I went to school, but we need to make it easier for people to transition into the teaching profession, to be able to, if they have these related fields, to turn people on. And our universities, I think, have to really focus on better throughput to get people graduating faster if they have the interest and desire to do so. It's not a simple thing, though, because this seems to be as much a cultural problem as a technical problem.
Thank you, sir.
My knee.
Governor Bush, on behalf of our friends, the Weatherspoons, who sponsor this series, Kenan-Flagler Business School community, thank you for continuing a wonderful series of lectures for the Kenan-Flagler community, for the university community. I would make one observation in conclusion. One of the ways I like to think about leaders is, are they willing to take their own advice? And I would give you high marks in that regard in the following sense. You are hopeful, you are optimistic, you are joyful, and that's a good note on which to conclude. Thank you, everybody, for coming.